I'm Ken Cruikshank. I'm a historian at McMaster University. I'm the co-author of a book called The People in the Bay, An Environmental History of Hamilton Harbor. I've been working on, not working on right now, but I've been working on the history of Hamilton Harbor since the mid-1990s, off and on.
So we're going to mainly talk about Cootes Paradise today, which has a really rich history. But why is it called Cootes Paradise?
Cootes Paradise, it's named Cootes Paradise after Captain Cootes, who allegedly was an active hunter in the area, and it was named after him. For years it was also was known as the Dundas Marsh, which may be a more appropriate title and maybe give us a sense of what it is. That it is in fact a shallow marsh at the very tip of Lake Ontario.
So can you tell us a little bit about Captain Cootes' time and how Cootes Paradise has changed over time?
Well, I think I'll talk first about the 19th century. With the coming of European settlers, setting up a settler colony in the area. The early development in this area is, of course, not Hamilton, it's in Dundas. And Dundas, because of the water pouring off the escarpment, acquires a number of water-driven industries, and the merchants and manufacturers in Dundas are pushing for better access to Lake Ontario, and that access comes via the Desjardins Canal. The Desjardins Canal is supported in the 1820s and into the 1830s, and it's built there, at least initially built, and it's built through the Cootes Paradise. It requires them to push aside, in a sense, the marsh on two sides and to erect wooden walls along the edges in order to move boats through Cootes Paradise. Now, the original Desjardins Canal runs around what we think of as Burlington Heights, the height of land on the eastern end of Cootes Paradise. In the 1850s, when the Grand Trunk Railway Great Western Railway builds into Hamilton, it will become the Grand Trunk. When the Great Western builds into Hamilton, they make a decision to dig a canal through Burlington Heights. They want to fill in the original canal opening at the end. And one of the things we actually don't know is what all this construction did to the environment of Cootes. We know what they did. We know that it creates an opening through into the harbor, and at the same time, in the 1820s, an opening into the lake. It's really the first time, we actually don't know what that did, the first time that you have a major opening into Lake Ontario. But we have changed the environment already of Cootes in some way. What we do know is the impact that Cootes itself had on the Desjardins Canal, which was it wasn't a happy canal. It was difficult to sustain this canal because it kept filling in. This is a marsh, and it kept silting in, and they would dredge it, but in the end, it is not a particularly successful canal connecting Dundas. And the real winner in this is not Dundas, is not even the Cootes, it is Hamilton. And maybe that's significant too for the history of Cootes, because Hamilton will develop and will have less immediate impact on Cootes Paradise as it develops in the 19th century.
And how did Cootes Paradise become protected land?
It becomes protected land in the late 1920s. Let me just say that we have the good fortune in some ways that Hamilton's industrial development, which happens in the late 19th and early 20th century, really takes place on the harbor and even the eastern end of the harbor. And there is less development, immediate development, along the shores of Cootes Paradise. In some communities in North America, marshes like Cootes Paradise would have disappeared in the 19th and early 20th century. They would have been filled in. Marshes were seen as swamps. Swamps were associated with disease, and so they were not valued. And usually, they were the real value they had is that they could be filled in relatively easily to make new land. Fortunately, we don't need to do that. And when there are the beginnings of plans like that in the 1920s, there are people who value Cootes for its natural environment. There is a Hamilton Birding Society formed in 1920. It will become the Hamilton Naturalist Club. And the Birding Society is representative of a kind of elite group of birders who align themselves also with people who are interested in hunting. And in the 1920s, they push for the creation of Cootes Paradise as a nature sanctuary. Really, they're thinking bird sanctuary. Why would hunters want a bird sanctuary, you might ask, and it's quite simple that hunters, there was a convincing case made beginning in the early 20th century that setting aside marshes would of course provide space for ducks to reproduce, and the more ducks that were available elsewhere, the better the hunting would be. So you wanted to set aside certain areas so that the birds could breed so that you could hunt them elsewhere.
And how did the RBG get involved in all of this?
Well, the RBG is created and given control not only of Cootes Paradise but other lands. In some ways, I have to pick up the story from where I left off in the 1920s. In the 1920s, the people who are pushing for a bird sanctuary are very fortunate to have as one of their allies a politician named Tom McQuestion. Tom McQuestion was the head of the Parks Board in Hamilton, and he had a vision of creating green spaces, a ring in some ways of green spaces around Hamilton, and saw Cootes as, he valued different kinds of green spaces, but he saw Cootes as a wild space that you would try to preserve. At the same time, the Westdale is being developed in the 1920s, and the real estate developers in Westdale have acquired much of the property that edges along the southern shore of Cootes Paradise, but they're having some financial difficulties, and they owe the city some money. So Tom McQuestion, who runs the city-run but with its own budget, Parks Board, makes a deal. And he makes a deal to acquire the southern shore of Cootes Paradise with the developers in exchange for them not having to pay their taxes, which gives them some financial advantages. So he acquires for the Parks Board the southern shore, and he will gradually acquire other lands around Cootes Paradise. Tom McQuestion, it's actually a good thing that Tom McQuestion will become Minister of Highways in the 1930s, because he acquires other sites that we might think of as part of the RBG in order to ostensibly for quarrying for highways and roads, but he somehow or other some of them make their way into what we would think of as the Royal Botanical Gardens area around Cootes. So McQuestion and the Parks Board then apply for and get royal status, and they have a vision of what Cootes Paradise will look like. And the vision in the 1920s and 1930s is of a cultivated park, and as well as there's a grand scheme for parking and theaters and all sorts of things that would be in Cootes Paradise. It's probably a good thing that much of that can't be afforded at the time, but we do get the creation of this entity called the Royal Botanical Gardens, in some ways to look after cultivated gardens, but given a mandate of control over the rest of Cootes Paradise.